Hi, my name is Cora Beth, and in this very short video, I'm just going to talk a little bit about the difference between primary and secondary sources. First up, what is a primary source? Well, that is a trickier question than it looks, perhaps, and it does rather depend on what subject and module you are studying. What I'm going to be talking about here is specifically the Open University Myth module. And so the things that I class as primary and secondary sources here are specific to that. But broadly speaking, a primary source is something original and creative. It might be a painting or a poem. It might be the writings of a Roman historian or a modern play. It's often something created for an audience. It doesn't matter whether it's ancient or modern. It can still be primary. As I've said, what is a primary source is not an easy question to answer sometimes. There are some sources that are tricky to categorize. Some sources could be primary or could be secondary, depending on how you use them. Some sources are both primary and secondary at the same time. Things like an edition of a classical text, which in itself might be classed as a primary source. But if you're talking about the introduction written by the editor, that would be a secondary source. I would say don't worry too much about these tricky ones. What you're really aiming for in your work is to get a suitable balance between primary and secondary. You're looking at the big picture. You're not necessarily having to worry too much about specific examples. Now, the question that people have been struggling with, what classes as secondary scholarship? Well, the module books that you've been working through, those class as secondary scholarship. They are written by named authors and you can reference them accordingly. The module readings, those class as secondary scholarship. The further reading links, those also class as good secondary scholarship. The Oxford Classical Dictionary is sort of secondary scholarship. Reference works are tricky to categorize as scholarship sometimes, but the OCD is really very much in the middle because the entries are written by scholars who give their names, and you can again reference them as you would a published article. Academic books and articles that you source through the OU library, these are good examples of secondary scholarship. So if you're an Open University student, restricting your search patterns to the Open University library will help you to dodge some of the most common problems. What doesn't count as secondary scholarship? Well, quite a lot of things that people seem to assume are secondary scholarship. So encyclopedias. Encyclopedias are very useful and you should definitely use them, but they're not so much the level of scholarship that we're looking for. They tend to be more collections of information than works that take a critical perspective. So by all means use encyclopedias, by all means reference them, but don't leave it at that. Go exploring for proper secondary scholarship too. Random websites. You may find lots of interesting things on random websites, but they don't class as secondary scholarship, so be careful how much you use them. Source compilations, source books with selections of ancient sources. These are again very useful, but they don't really class as secondary scholarship. Study guides. Study guides like you would find online, usually helping you with a particular text. These are not appropriate as secondary scholarship. The reason for that is because they are written for people studying at a fairly basic level. They are not something that you should be using and referencing in your own work. Podcasts. Podcasts are often excellent. There is no reason why you shouldn't use them. However, they don't entirely class as secondary scholarship, so if you do use them, you should always supplement them with other things that do class as secondary scholarship. The same can be said for documentaries. Documentaries tend to be made for a wide general audience. They're usually not specialized enough to be properly useful to you in your work. And then other people's BA or MA work. I'm coming across this a lot at the moment. I think mainly because if you do a search for a particular topic on Google Scholar, you are currently coming across a lot of unpublished MA thesis work or even BA dissertation work. This is very much to be avoided, not because it may not be good. It may well be good. It may also be awful. There's no quality control there. You can't check to see whether it's a reputable publication. And also the level is not really something that you should be aspiring to use. So when you see something online, do check and make sure it's something that's actually been published and not something that somebody has just uploaded as their MA or BA work. It helps to understand the reason why certain things are classed as secondary scholarship and certain things aren't. There are two levels to proper scholarship. I put that in inverted commas because I don't necessarily agree with all of this, but it's the current state of the discipline. Right, so the first level is it needs to be written by somebody with an academic interest and qualifications in the subject. So usually, but not always, someone associated with a university. It should be written by somebody with some claim to expertise. It also needs to be peer reviewed, and this is the key point, and this is why most of the things on my previous list fail the test of secondary scholarship. It needs to be peer reviewed, which means that it has developed through feedback from other scholars. This happens through the process of journal publication. So when you submit an article to an academic journal, it gets sent out to reviewers, and the reviewers recommend that it be published or not be published, and they also recommend a load of changes, and so usually when you've made the changes, it can then be published. So the point is, it's been sort of rubber stamped by the academic community. The same goes if you publish a book through an academic press. So those are the things to look out for. Is it from a journal? Is it from an academic publisher? If so, then it classes as secondary scholarship. If not, you may have to do further digging. Finally, good luck with your research. I hope you enjoy it. But if you're in any doubt about whether a source that you found is appropriate for you to use, then please do ask somebody. Tutors are always happy to help, and you can usually find good support in the community forums too. So please don't suffer in silence. Always ask.